Looking right at you, Atala. Love you, man. We were singing that song, Hidden, and my thought was, your life is hidden with Christ. He will walk with you through every shadow. So happy to be part of a church that just has such a love for the Lord, and we get to see his impact. It was August 7th, 1974. About an hour after the break of dawn, when the pedestrians and traffic of the New York streets were at a standstill, looking in awe up at the sky. Because as they looked up, they saw the 24-year-old French daredevil, Philippe Petit, as he was walking a tightrope between the northern and southern towers of the World Trade Centers. And this picture that was taken at the time didn't get its fame until almost 30 years later, when another event involving the skies of New York City had everyone at a standstill. And the picture didn't get famous just because it was an eerie foreshadowing of what was to come some 30 years later, but because in a single still, in a single image, it captured the collision of two totally different stories. One story of a death-defying, awe-inspiring act, and another story of a debased act of disillusionment. And this picture echoes the high-wire walk of humanity, the walk that you and I are on, of the tightrope between faith and doubt. These are the stories between which every person in this room walks. It's where you and I live on that tightrope. It's where we pay our bills. It's where we raise our children. It's where we work our jobs. It's where we question the meaning of life. It's where we attend religious gatherings looking for hope. And it's also the place where we wrestle with doubt, with disappointment, with setbacks, with limitations. And it's the place where Jesus meets us and speaks into the human experience. And I'm going to be very real with you from the get-go. This past month, I have been on that tightrope, kind of like this. I don't know which way I'm going to fall. Is it going to be faith, or is it going to be doubt? Our family has been dealt a series of what one friend of mine so aptly called a number of gut punches, body blows, one after another. Any single one of them would have been fine, but cumulatively, they have caused a lot of grief in us. There has been pain. There's been disillusionment. There's been confusion. There's been bitterness welling up in me, hatred, self-hatred, anger. A situation where we look at other people and we see that it seems like things are going well for them, so why not for us? And so this sermon is going to be so different than if I were in a different place personally. And I'm usually a little more jovial, I'm a little more of a jokester. I like to bring humor, and this is a little heavy today. So I don't want you to walk out feeling too down. I am hopeful. I am so hopeful. God is drawing near, the clouds are clearing, things are improving. But I just want you to know where I'm at. And that's really important because this is the place where Jesus is meeting me, and it's the place where he can meet you if you are here as well. We've been in this series called Encounters, looking at Jesus' encounter with different people through the Gospel of John. And last week on Easter, we saw his encounter with Mary Magdalene, and it was so filled with hope and joy and faith. And Mary goes from that place after she sees the risen Jesus on Sunday morning, and she starts telling the disciples. But the gospel accounts say that they were hesitant to believe her. They couldn't muster up that kind of faith. They thought she was a little bit crazy. And so we pick up our account in John chapter 20. And it says, that Sunday evening, the disciples were meeting behind locked doors because they were afraid of the Jewish leaders. So it's Sunday night now. Jesus rose Sunday morning. Mary saw him. Mary has told the disciples. Other people have told the disciples. And yet, even though they know the tomb is empty, they are hiding due to fear. The empty tomb was not enough for the disciples. The empty tomb alone did not have them piecing together this supernatural story. Instead, it had them locked away in fear. And I was going through the gospel accounts trying to figure out, okay, when Jesus rose, who was he meeting with? When was he meeting with them? How was their response to him? And it was so confusing. It felt like it was all over the place. And the only clear picture that emerged to me was that those closest to Jesus were torn between faith and doubt. They were like a wave going back and forth. I think I believe. I don't know. Maybe I do. Maybe I don't. And that so aptly describes the human condition. You probably know it well. There are times when I believe and times where I don't. And so we're going this morning to settle in to an encounter between Jesus and Thomas. And we're going to let God stir up and be present in our own disappointments, our own doubts. And we're going to let him minister to us. And I want to pray a specific prayer because I kind of want to model. Like when I'm in this state, when I'm feeling these discouragements and these disappointments, when I'm questioning God's love for me and his care for me, I turn to prayers like this. This is from John Eldridge. And so would you just please pray this with me? Jesus, I need your strength. I need it, God. I need the strength that prevails because I don't want to fall away. I don't want to lose heart. So Jesus, right now, I choose you above all things. I give you my allegiance. I give you my undivided love. I choose single-heartedness toward you. Lord Jesus, all of you, all of me is yours. I pray for supernatural resilience. God, fill me, fill us in this room with your overcoming strength, a victorious strength. We receive that now by faith. Amen. We're going to jump into John chapter 20. If you have your Bibles, if not, the words will be up on the screen. One of the 12 disciples, Thomas, nicknamed the twin, was not with the others when Jesus came. And so they told him, "We have seen the Lord." But he replied, "I won't believe it unless I see the nail wounds in his sides, put my fingers into them, and place my hand into the wound in his side." This passage, maybe a little bit unfairly, but historically has dubbed him as Doubting Thomas. But we have to keep in mind when we read this that Thomas knew about the empty tomb. He was aware. The primary problem for Thomas was not a lack of intellectual evidence. And that's how we typically read the story. We look at it and we say, well, if Thomas just had enough evidence, physical evidence, then he would believe. That is the one and only thing that he needed. And Thomas is seen as this rational and hyper-logical guy that just wants the facts. And there's a couple problems with this approach. The first is that we have a tendency to apply our own Western worldview on people in the Bible. And so because us in America tend to be rational and scientific and logical, and we tend to focus on evidence and apologetics and give me the scientific facts, we assume that's what they wanted too. That's not always the case. And the second issue is that we assume that faith is primarily an intellectual exercise that we do with our brain. But when you look at the biblical view of faith, when you look at how faith was used in their ancient context, you find out that faith not only had intellectual elements to it, but it had elements of loyalty and of allegiance. There was genuine love involved. To be faithful to a king or an emperor in the first century was to give them your allegiance. It was to obey them. And faith for them was this mixture of emotional and intellectual and relational and behavioral elements all in one package. And if we miss that, if we misunderstand that, we are bound to misread this story of Thomas. Because under Thomas's doubt, under his response of disbelief was something deeply personal to him. And that makes sense, right? Under all of our responses to anything is something deeply personal to us. We respond based out of our personal experiences. And so what is it for Thomas that he's responding from? What is the experience that's driving him? Let's look at another encounter between Thomas and Jesus to shed some light on this. This is from John 11, and to set the scene, the disciples and Jesus have just got word that their friend Lazarus is likely to pass away. And Jesus says to them, this story will not end in death. But he deliberates. He doesn't go right away to his friend Lazarus. And a few days later, he says, now's the time to go visit him. But there's a little bit of anxiety because they were already told if they returned to this area that they were going to be stoned and killed. And so Jesus says, we're going to go. And this is what happens. Jesus told them plainly, Lazarus is dead, and for your sakes, I'm glad I wasn't there, meaning with Lazarus, for now you will really believe. Come, let's go see him. Thomas, nicknamed the twin, said to his fellow disciples, let's go too and die with Jesus. And so what do you make of that? How do you read that? Some people read that and they say, well, Thomas has apparently resigned himself to death. Because remember, he's the hyper-rational and logical guy. So the only thing he can think is, Jesus is crazy. He's going to go back to Judea. We're going to get stoned. Let's go. That's all we got. I guess we'll do that. I don't think that's what's going on. I think Thomas is expressing his loyalty here, his commitment, his love for Jesus. He's saying, I want nothing more than to follow you, Rabbi Jesus. I trust you. Come on, guys. Let's go. Even if we die, let's go. It's worth it. He knows what he's doing. We've seen him act before. We have to believe this. That's what I think is going on. But if that's the case, the issue is, why don't we see that kind of faith in John chapter 20? See, I think Thomas is ready and willing to die with Jesus, but he's not ready to live without Jesus. Plenty of people resign themselves to a bleak outlook on life. There's plenty of people that have little to no religious affiliation that get through life without having some kind of lasting and ultimate hope. It's not that uncommon. And maybe it's not even that difficult. Maybe accepting our inevitable death and the ultimate meaninglessness of the nature of our lives is something that we can either come to grips with or push out of our minds just enough to where it doesn't get to us. But what we can't do, and what Thomas couldn't do, is live in the face of hope when our experience says that's not possible. That can't happen for me. There's the German philosopher and religious critic, Friedrich Nietzsche, who said about hope that in truth, it is the most evil of evils because it prolongs a man's torment. And so I wonder if for Thomas, if it seemed like Jesus had spun a web, this grand illusion, and then hung him out to dry, left him. I wonder if for Thomas, he was experiencing not only the crushing of his own personal hopes of who he was supposed to become with Jesus. I was supposed to be with this guy. He was supposed to make me into someone who could face the world. He was supposed to make me into someone. I wonder if he was not only experiencing the crushing of those hopes, but also the crushing of his hopes for the entire world. This Jesus guy was different. He was supposed to be there for me and the world. He was supposed to make a difference. And I wonder if Thomas felt let down. If he felt like Jesus didn't come through for him when he needed him most. After all, Thomas was willing to give everything to Jesus. And I wonder if you've been there, if you've been in that position where you feel like, God, I went out on a limb for you. I did that for you. That was hard. But I did it for you, and this is how you repay me? This is what you've given me? This is what happens now? That's an unsettling place if you've been there. It's deeply unsettling. And we know, right? When I'm there, I know deep down that God is not some kind of quid pro quo, this for that, you scratch my back, I'll scratch yours. I know that in my head. But oftentimes my experience matches the all too human drama of feeling like someone who was supposed to be in my corner has turned away from me or rejected me. And I know logically that's not true, right? But the feeling sits there. So it's like, what do I do with this? And for Thomas, I wonder if for him, it seemed like Jesus had not only let him down, but the entire world. Thomas had given up his life. He stopped everything to follow this rabbi Jesus, to learn from his teachings. And as he's watching Jesus, he's maybe thinking, there's something more to this rabbi. I wonder, do you guys think he's the promised king? Do you think he's the one that our ancestors spoke of that would set the world back in order, that would make all things right? Is this him? Maybe it is. I think it is. It's gotta be. It's gotta be him. And then he's gone. Fraud. Just like the rest of them. Tyler Staton said, the battle between belief and doubt is often the intellectual expression of a deeper emotional battle between love and fear. See, I think Thomas doubted not because of a lack of intellectual evidence, but because of an experience of disappointment. And I want you to think about your doubts. Think about where they come from. Because us Americans especially, we like to hide behind the intellectual banner. If only I had enough evidence, then I would believe. But I bet that the place where your deepest doubts exist is also the home of your greatest disappointments. I would bet that that is true for you. God opens the door to the dream job, and we get it. But then the company restructures, and it's lost. God gives you the courage to ask that person out, and things are going good, and then they reject you, and you're left feeling alone and abandoned again. The marriage that was once healthy and good is now filled with a sense of bitterness and a backlog of betrayals. Parenting a child who goes wayward and blames you for it. Or maybe it's praying for the child for years. I want a child, God. I want a child. And you lose the child. These are the things that the enemy wants to use to crush our soul, to rob us of hope and belief and faith. And well-meaning people come along and they try to give us the intellectual evidence. They say, look at the tomb, it's empty. Jesus isn't there, he's risen, he's alive, but it falls on deaf ears, not because of our hard-heartedness necessarily, but because the empty tomb simply is not enough. And then we make the ultimate mistake. Then we join forces with the darkness, and we start to move away from God. Rather than moving towards him in lament and protest and prayer, God, how long are you going to be absent in my life? How long are you going to allow this evil to happen and let people get away with things while you feel like you are crushing me down? How long, God? Instead of that, we move away in despair and anger and accusation. I hate you, God. You did this to me. I will never forget this. I will never trust you again. And then we make agreements with disappointment. And we say, I will never risk this kind of disappointment in my life again. And we begin to let disappointment mentor us. And all of a sudden, we find ourselves a little bit uneasy around hope and faith. We start to resist it, and we start to isolate. Cue Thomas. John 20:24, one of the 12 disciples, Thomas, was not with them when Jesus came. Why? Why? It doesn't say. To be perfectly honest, I don't know why. I can guess based on knowing one of the first symptoms of doubt is isolation. Because doubt creates this sense in us of I don't belong, I don't fit in, these people don't get me, they don't understand me. And so we start to pull away from our community and we start to gravitate towards people that will affirm our skepticism and affirm our doubts, and it feels so good at first. People affirming what I feel. Yeah, I agree with you. Maybe God's not real. I don't think he is. He never came through for me. Yeah, you're right. And now that I think about it, he didn't come through for my friends either. It feels so good, but it's debilitating because it is also an illusion. Just like the person who left the faith thinking faith was an illusion, they find that the community of the skeptical is also an illusion, because community that affirms you without ever challenging you may make you feel comfortable, but it will do nothing to move you. It will do nothing to heal you. Building our lives on disappointment won't make anything better, but it will protect us. And this is why the next verse may be one of the most courageous verses in the Bible. When it says, 8 days later, the disciples were together again, and this time Thomas was with them. Again, it doesn't say where he was or why he wasn't with them. So I am reading into this a little bit. I do understand that. To be honest, my assumption is that I think Thomas probably needed some space to process this massive disappointment, but that is an assumption. And I just wonder if walking back up into that upper room to meet with the disciples was one of the hardest things that this man ever had to do, because he had to face his doubt head on. And I truly think the bravest person in this room is the one who's coming here honestly seeking, is Jesus worth giving my life to? Or the person who feels like they have been let down, but they're not letting go. They're pushing through the wall. They're pushing through the disappointment. Following Jesus is about a journey. It's a journey with highs and lows. It's a journey of faith and disappointment and doubt. It's a time of nearness with God and times of darkness and distance and silence. I think the experience of Thomas is maybe more normal than we like to give it credit for. I have a lot of thoughts on that later that I'll unpack. Jesus let Thomas sit in his unrest for 8 days. 8 days while Thomas went through what Christian mystics through the centuries have called the dark night of the soul. Other followers of Jesus have called it the wall, the place in our faith journey when we just hit it and we're stuck and you can't go around it. You can't. And Jesus knows that. So he lets Thomas hit the wall, knowing that the only way forward is to wait on God as he moves you through it. Jesus knows that every one of his followers must journey through the wall, sometimes multiple times in your life. 8 days later, the disciples were together again. This time, Thomas was with them. The doors were locked, but suddenly, as before, Jesus was standing among them. "Peace be with you," he said. And he said to Thomas, "Put your fingers here and look at my hands. Put your hand into the wound." I just picture him holding it. Then I picture him, "Don't be faithless, Thomas. Believe." And that's when Thomas says, "My Lord and my God." You didn't give up on me. You care. You're here. And so the twin named Thomas, who inside himself wrestled with the twins of faith and unbelief, each one contending for mastery over him. That twin made the twin confession about Jesus, my Lord and my God, and he stamped his loyalty on Jesus. He said, I commit myself to you. And this is such a picture of our lives. This is the collision of stories. It's the collision of the story of Thomas's doubt and Thomas's resurrected faith. And it's also the collision of the stories of your doubt and your disappointments and your disillusionments and mine, and Jesus meeting us there. Every one of us here is Thomas's twin. We wrestle with the twins of faith and unbelief. And just like Thomas, every one of us here is personally beckoned by Jesus to trust him in the midst of our uncertainties, in the midst of our disappointments. Jesus said it like this: you believe because you have seen me. Blessed are those who believe without seeing me. And this is the question I've been working through in my personal life. Like, how do I move forward in faith in the midst of doubt, in the midst of disappointment? How do I believe without seeing? And so what I have for you is not a comprehensive and refined set of skills and answers that are going to alleviate all of your struggles, but they're things that have helped me in this journey, and they are helping me as I'm in the midst of this. Number one, reframe the role of doubts and disappointments. And this is tricky. I think most of us tend to see them as intrusive, unwanted, unproductive, and inherently sinful. To doubt is to sin, or to be disappointed is to lack faith and trust in Jesus. And I'm not going to lie, that could be the case. There were times when Jesus rebuked doubt. And so in my head, I'm like, okay, doubt can be sinful. We can turn to sin, but I think it's when we move away from God and start to accuse, when we turn away from him and we make agreements with evil. I think there's a way, though, to also normalize doubt and see it as something that Jesus wants to use to inspire new levels and new categories of faith in us. We can see it as more normal. It doesn't have to bring the shame factor into our lives. Doubt and disappointments are not inherently sinful. What we do with them can be, for sure. But we need to normalize it a little more. Create space in the church culture that says it's okay to feel these things. That does not mean that you're some wayward child and you'll never be recovered. You'll never receive faith again. 2, embrace the mystery of Jesus. The pillars of the Christian faith are resurrection and incarnation. How do you explain those things? The God of the universe becoming a human. Someone dead coming back to life. It does not fit with the pillars of Western society of certainty and reason and logic. They don't fit together. We have to embrace the mystery of Jesus. Peter ends in his relatively controversial and yet I think helpful book, The Sin of Certainty, said that doubt means spiritual relocation is happening. It's God's way of saying time to move on, not time to move on from faith. But he's saying that doubt has a way of forcing our hand and confronting us with the challenge of deeper trust in God. It was in 1975, Jesuit philosopher John Kavanagh. He went to visit Mother Teresa in the home of the dying in Calcutta, India. And on his first morning there, he meets Mother Teresa, and she says, "What can I do for you?" And he says, "You can pray for me." She said, "Okay, what can I pray for you about?" And he said, pray that I have clarity. And she said, no. She said, no, I will not. He's like, why? Why won't you do that? And she said, because clarity is the last thing you are clinging to and must let go of. Wow. And so the story goes on to say, he said to her, well, you seem to have clarity. And she laughs. And she says, I've never had clarity. What I have always had is trust. So I will pray that you have trust in God. I love that. 3, when you're walking through disappointment and doubt, resist the temptation to isolate. Community has a way of exposing what is underneath our doubts. I am not going to be the first person to pull away from my community of friends because I get FOMO way too much. I love people. I want to be around them. But what I do is I pull away internally. I don't reveal as much about what's going on inside me. And sometimes I even hide it from myself because I don't want to know. Sometimes I get cynical and I say people will never understand what I'm going through. And sometimes I don't even realize that I'm holding things in. So over the past month, as we've taken these body blows, it came to a point this past week where Lauren looked at me on the couch and she just gently said, have you been struggling with negative thoughts? And all of a sudden it was like, just everything came to the surface. The things that I kind of knew were there became conscious. And so as I was able to say to her, no, it's a lot worse than that. I'm struggling to believe that I'm not better off dead. That's where I'm at. And I knew it was kind of there lurking, but to say it, in a sense, was like, okay, it's out there. And this is something like, I mean, literally before we did this, I did a restorative prayer session with Jeff, renouncing self-hatred. This is not something where I'm trying to make you nervous that I'm going to go and take my life. These are things that I've oscillated in and out through teenage years of like having these thoughts. And now it's like, oh my gosh, there it is again. Like, how did it assault me like that? How did it get in here? Like, I'm conscious of it. I'm aware of it. I'm dealing with it. I feel safe. Plus, I'm a therapist. I can therapize myself. It doesn't work like that. It does not work. No. But seriously, like and I'm speaking specifically and especially to teenagers, young adults in the room right now, if you have those thoughts, it's okay. It's okay to tell someone. You don't have to be afraid to bring it up. And if you're a parent of someone who brings that to you, don't go to the extremes. Don't shut it down. Well, that's ridiculous. Why would you do that? Don't freak out. Oh my gosh, we got to like get you into all the treatment right away. Listen, be present, be there. I'm happy to talk to you. If you need help navigating that, I truly am happy to talk with you about how to do that. It is serious, but we commit ourselves to Jesus. I will not harm myself because I trust in your love for me, Jesus, and I renounce self-hatred. That's what we do. It's worth it. Number 4, practice the presence of Jesus. There's a reason Jesus said he's the way, the truth, and the life. And I think it's because he knew that it would be only by living in the way of Jesus can you experience the truth of Jesus and the life of Jesus. You cannot have just one of the 3-piece puzzle. You have to live in the way of Jesus. And as I shared last time I was up here, that over the past 9 to 12 months, I've been learning that in issues of spiritual warfare, I have to pray the prayer right here, right now. I've got to deal with it. Otherwise, I put it on the back burner, and I don't deal with it. And God has been teaching me over these past couple weeks that I have to apply that same principle to my disappointments. I have to immediately bring them to the Lord and let him deal with them. Let him speak into them. Because if I don't, I put them in my brain and I lodge them as subtle evidence of maybe you don't care about me, God. And I just start to tell myself that quietly on repeat, and I don't even know I'm doing it until it's too late. And then I start to pull away I don't practice listening prayer. I don't do the normal things to help me keep in union with Jesus. I pull away from myself. I don't lament to him. I don't give gratitude towards him. I isolate. It's a recipe for disaster. I have to bring my lament to God because we are not changed. Our doubts are not transformed primarily through receiving more intellectual evidence. We are changed primarily through the experience, the encounter of God's presence in our lives. Tyler Staton, he said it so well. He said, an empty tomb was never enough. Not for anyone. It never has been and never will be. So what are we looking for? The presence of the living God. It is not a better explanation of Jesus that the world waits on, but the experience of his living presence. I'm going to invite the band up. Last thing that I've been practicing, walking through doubt and disappointment, is the discipline of waiting on God. And I'm not talking a passive waiting of resignation and despair. I'm talking an active waiting of prayer, of lament, of spiritual discipline, of community, of committing ourselves to Jesus. It is difficult. But Sue Monk Kidd said, when you are waiting, you are not doing nothing. You're doing the most important something there is. You're allowing your soul to grow up. Sometimes we just need the time and the space for our soul to grow up. If you can't be still and wait, you can't become what God created you to be. So I wait on God as I journey with him through the wall. I wait with hope. Some days my hope is up here. Some days it's down here. But I refuse to isolate. I say out loud, I love you, Jesus, and I believe you love me. I look at you, looking at me in love, and I receive it. Sometimes I don't feel it. Sometimes I do feel it. And I have hope. Our big idea is that Jesus climbs into the casket of our deepest doubts and disappointments, personally meeting us. After 8 days, Jesus went to Thomas, and Jesus entered into his personal brand of pain and disappointment. And Jesus can do that with you too. Our challenge is to wait on God during the dark night of the soul, reframing your doubts as part of the journey through the wall. I don't want you to leave feeling just down. This is hard, but it is so worth it. There is nothing I would rather do. Mother Teresa said that her dark night lasted for decades. It's astounding to me. We're going to turn to worship our last song, Hymn of Heaven. The prayer team's going to be over at the cross and back by the lights. If you are in a place of disappointment, disillusionment, disenchantment, doubt, whatever it is, come receive prayer. Get it out there. Speak it. God can do something with it when it's out in community. He can still do something with it if you hold it in, but it's a lot harder to penetrate into the walls that we put up around God. Get it out there. Let's stand and worship.